So this is clearly one of those days when I'm not going to get recorded what I wanted to record. I'm going to talk about something now that I've never talked about, I don't think, on YouTube, or certainly not this aspect of it. So I might lose it a little bit, all right? I might get a bit ranty. If that bothers you, then fuck off. I'm sorry about that. I mean that in the nicest possible way. I just might happen because this is one of these most bullshitty, stupid things that I think that I've ever read. And it's by somebody called Ali Michael, and it was written 6 months ago following the Rachel Dolezal thing. And Ali Michael, clearly, well, she's somebody who... she's white guilt personified. And what I want to say is, just fuck off with your white guilt, right? What I mean by that is, if you live in a racist society and there's racism going on, and you feel, and it's people of your race who's doing it, then by all means you might want to say something about it, and you might feel a tinge of embarrassment about what happens, or you might feel kind of let down by people who you end up associated with purely because of the fact that you have the same ethnic origins that they do. I get that, no problem with that. But when we're talking about things that happened fucking centuries ago, right, you weren't even a fucking sperm in your dad's ball sack when these things happened, then you can fuck off with all of that, right, because I have no time for that. And this is what she says. Few things here I want to read out that she says. The first thing that she says, where is it there? Because at the end of the day, we need white people to see that we are white. When we recognise and own our whiteness, we can account for our own portion, our own 1/1,000,000th of responsibility for what white people have done throughout history. So that's her stance, that we are responsible for that. And this is how negatively this whole thing has impacted on her. This is what she said here. There was a time in my 20s when everything I learned about the history of racism made me hate myself. I'm going to read the rest of it out, but just let me say, this is a woman she is the personification, clearly, of anti-racism. Right? She exudes anti-racism from every fucking pore in her body, and yet she's hating herself. Not hating other people, hating herself. Let me start again. There was a time in my 20s when everything I learned about the history of racism made me hate myself, my whiteness, my ancestors, and my descendants. So she's hating people. She's blaming people, because there's no reason to hate them unless you blame them, is there? She's blaming people that aren't even fucking born yet. And this is how badly it's affected her. I remember deciding that I couldn't have biological children because I didn't want to propagate my privilege biologically. I mean, for fuck's sake. She says, right at the start of it, white people, just tell me if you're a white person, if this is you, right? Because this is what she's saying white people do. I think it's just her, right? She's just become obsessed with this whole self-hate thing, right? She just wants to claw her fucking white skin off her fucking stupid white face, right? That's what she wants to do. She said that white people immerse themselves in trying to figure out how to be white in our society and emerge with a new relationship to whiteness. What an absolute load of shite. I've never read a bigger load of shite, or at least I hadn't until I got further down into the article and read some of the other shite that she'd written there. What I want to know is, right, I'm assuming that if this Ali Michael, if she sees an Italian, she doesn't start prodding them on the chest, right, and saying, what? Are you going to apologise for the Roman Empire? If she sees a fucking German, she doesn't start, an 18-year-old German, she doesn't start saying, do you accept responsibility for what happened in the Second World War? Well, I hope she doesn't, because if somebody wasn't even fucking alive then, you know, it's kind of going back to the whole fucking biblical bullshit. I thought we'd got beyond that. I thought everybody had agreed that however you read the Old Testament and the Adam and Eve story, we're not going to abide by this principle that you are responsible, that you inherit the sins of your ancestors. So Adam and Eve fucked up, and who's to blame for it? You're to fucking blame, bucko. You're to fucking blame for what Adam and Eve did all that time ago. You're responsible for it. It's your fuck up, right? Your fault. Your fault. You're the guilty party. I thought we'd got beyond that kind of bullshit and decided that that's really not an ethical way to carry on. And yet this is what is going on here. And this article, it like covers every possible fucking aspect that you can imagine here. She goes into the whole cultural, I can hardly bring myself to say it, the whole cultural appropriation shit. Look, I understand cultural appropriation as a concept in terms of kind of demeaning and trivializing things that people hold very important, right? So I can get that. If you take an example of some sacred ceremony somebody does and you turn it into a load of commercialized bullshit, then I get it. But what she says is here, she says, and lots of white people, myself included, do this in thousands of tiny ways as we appropriate the culture of others, from Africa, India, Compton, Guatemala, Harlem, Mexico, to fill in the blanks in our own. I'll tell you what, fuck off! Because what I know is, right, my country had an empire, and some of what we got through that empire is not something to be proud of. We took stuff we shouldn't have fucking took. We denuded, we raped countries. We took their possessions, we took their resources, and we treated them very badly. It's a testament to human character that we still have the Commonwealth and that we have a good relationship with most of those countries. That's fantastic. But other things we've taken from them cultures, we've took in a more positive light. And we are nourished, we are enriched by that. She talks about India. My country has been greatly enriched by Indian culture in a variety of ways. And I embrace that, right? And I don't think that's some bullshit cultural appropriation. She can fuck off with that. And what does she say to an Indian person? What does she say? They have a parliamentary democracy. It's the fucking Westminster system that they use. Where the fuck does she think that came from? Where did the fucking Indians culturally appropriate that from, perhaps? Should they not be allowed to use that because that's cultural appropriation? You know, Indians, the great love of India, the great sporting love of India is cricket. Should they feel ashamed of that? Oh my God, we've culturally appropriated cricket. How bad of us! It's a wonderful thing, and I feel privileged that Indians have took on board this game of cricket, which I love, which is from the country of my birth, and they love cricket and they nurture the world of cricket very much so. They've gained from that relationship, I've gained from that relationship, and this fucking cultural appropriation thing absolutely fucking stinks. It reminds me of the Halloween thing. Or with computer games. This is a great example. Video games. I heard somebody rattling on about video games and talking about cultural appropriation and trivializing different cultures like African cultures, you know, having the token sort of voodoo character or something like that because that doesn't properly represent Africans. As if fucking medieval knights in suits of armour accurately represents modern European culture. The problem is here, folks, is that the way things that are represented in our culture are generally trivialised and dumbed down, right? And if you're not prepared to see any other culture trivialised and dumbed down other than Western culture, then there's no fucking salvation for any of us. There's no way of representing those other cultures. Because what you're saying is if you don't represent those other cultures, then you're a shit. But if you do represent them, and you represent them in the same way that you're representing Western culture, then you're a culturally appropriating shit. So you're fucking damned if you do, and you are damned if you don't. Let me just give you the one positive from this, because I need to draw a bit of a line under this. You want to read this article, it's absolute shite. Right, this is what she wrote, and unfortunately, this is the one decent bit, and this is something that actually Ali Michael didn't write herself. She's quoting somebody else. Beverly Daniel Tatum has written that white people don't choose to identify as white because the categories to choose from are loaded from the start. Traditionally, one can identify as a colourblind white person, a racist white person, or an ignorant white person. There are 3 ways white people get talked about as white. Yeah, and they're all fucking negative, aren't they? And you know what it struck me, and it struck me for a long time, this is that we handle these labels that we give people in a uniform way, other than when we're talking about the label white, which is that once a label gets sufficiently loaded with negativity, we move on, don't we? We don't talk about people being mentally handicapped, or there's too many, and all the old terms that we had, you know, they all go. They've got to go, right? They've got to go because they're loaded with negativity. So we get new terms, special needs or learning difficulties. And of course, when terms like special needs, they start to get loaded down because they get used as an insult. So we then move on to another term, don't we? And so it is, you know, I use the term, I'll tell you a little anecdote here. I used the term persons of colour for the first time about a year ago in front of my wife, and she called me racist for having used the term person of colour, which I like because she's very PC with all these kinds of things, and I got one over on her because I knew something that she didn't, which was that this is the latest greatest term to use, right? So she thought it was akin to saying coloured, and I'm like, oh no, coloured, that's a terrible, obviously you're a racist if you say coloured, but person of colour is this new miraculously marvellous thing to say in place of the terms that we were using, right? Because that's what happens. It's like, it's a known phenomenon. It's a little fucking merry-go-round, right? Where you have to keep, a term gets loaded, so you move on to the next term, that gets loaded, move on to the next term, and so it fucking goes round. And that happens with everything, but it hasn't happened with the term white. Whenever I think of the term white, I always think of this imperialistic, colonialistic past. I think of racism, I think of prejudice and bigotry and ignorance. Why don't we get a fucking fresh term? Why do we keep sticking with the same term? It was a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, Diane Abbott, British MP, black woman, Londoner, fantastic MP, right, way to the left of me, don't agree with her politically on 101 different things, but she's a proper fucking MP, she's a genuine person, love her to pieces, and I think she's a really genuine, honest woman, and I don't think she's got a fucking racist bone in her body, right, but she made a comment about white people, which was a negative comment, it was a tweet, and she apologised for it and said, look, it was misunderstood and I maybe didn't phrase it very well. But what she said is that I said white, but what I was thinking about was about imperialism and colonialism and those kind of attitudes. Wasn't thinking about white people today. And I thought, you know what? I'm sure that is. But that's exactly what is fucking wrong with the term white, is which it's loaded down with all this baggage. So I think we need to do with the term white, the same as we've done with every other fucking term, we need a new term. I don't know what, I'd suggest person of whiteness, right? We need to stop calling people white and call them a person of whiteness. So we can just draw a clean slate, wipe the slate clean, and allow white people, persons of whiteness today, not to be held accountable for something that some cunt did 250 fucking years ago anymore, because that can't be right, can it? We've got to be able to move past these things, the same as we've done with Germans, the same as we've done with the Romans and the fucking Vikings and every cunt else. Right, we need to be able to draw a line under it. Just one last thing before I go, because I've always thought the terms black and white it's like if you wanted to come up with the terms, right, the biggest source of friction between groups, not ethnic groups, let's say racial groups, that's the really is what we're talking about here, between sub-Saharan African ethnicities and North European ethnicities, I should say, the tongue's going mad, North European ethnicities, that's been the greatest source of tension, hasn't it? Racial tensions there. And if you wanted to pick two fucking terms for those people, right, and you wanted to pick the worst terms that you could think of, right? So you asked a racist person, what terms would you like us to use? I don't think they could pick better terms than black and white. What is more polarised? What overemphasises the differences than black and white? I've never met anybody who is as dark as black. I've never met anybody who is as light as white. And I've met people... In Richard Dawkins' book, The Ancestor Tale, he shows a picture of, I think it's Colin Powell. And I don't know if Colin Powell's it might be with George W. Bush. Or he might have had a separate picture, I cannot remember now, of George Hamilton, of course, had an amazing tan. And the point was that the darker person that he'd shown was the white person, and the lighter person was the black person, you know. And this is the thing, we've picked two fucking terms there that are just so divisive. Why stick with those terms, right? If what we want is to get beyond, stop with all this silliness of skin colour and start just treating people as people, why do we still stick with terms like white? it's loaded down with baggage. It's inaccurate, and it just overemphasizes the differences. So I suggest we go with something different. What about person of light brownedness? I don't know that shit, but I'm sure there's something better that we can come up with. We can do better than we are doing, and let's just fuck off with all this guilt. Okay, that's it. That's all that I wanted to say. Thank you for listening to this rant, and bye for now.